Welcome, history enthusiasts, to an epic journey into the ancient world's greatest mysteries. The year is 216 BC, and Rome's mighty legions are completely shattered at Cannae. Nothing stands between Hannibal Barca and the absolute destruction of the greatest empire ever. Many believe his tired army simply lacked the proper siege weapons to breach the massive walls. But the real reason he ordered his men to stop is far more terrifying and quite brilliant. Over 50,000 Roman soldiers lie motionless across the mud and the blood-soaked earth today. The deafening silence of the dead is broken only by the distant cheers of victorious troops. Ancient historian Polybius claims the Roman war machine was absolutely shattered. Hannibal stands alone among the carnage, with his armor stained by the heavy cost of victory. The road to the capital city is completely open, leaving Roman citizens defenseless. One single command from this brilliant general could erase the Roman Republic from history. His fierce cavalry commander Hannibal urges him to march directly on the capital.
Delaying only gives them time to recover.
Hannibal promises that within 5 short days, they would be dining triumphantly on Capitol Hill. Yet facing the greatest opportunity of his entire lifetime, the great commander refuses. He looks at the bleeding horizon and orders his victorious men to hold their current positions. This single fateful decision has puzzled military historians for 2 millennia. Why would a man dedicating his existence to destroying Rome suddenly halt his advance? The panic inside the city walls is absolute, as senators prepare for their tragic end.
Betray Rome with these cowardly words.
Women mourn in the cobblestone streets, and the temples are filled with desperate, weeping citizens. They resort to the darkest ancient rituals, sacrificing human lives to appease their angry gods. Rome is a wounded animal, backed into a corner, completely stripped of its famous legions. A rapid cavalry strike would have plunged the entire ancient metropolis into utter chaos. However, the Carthaginian army stays planted in the southern Italian countryside. To understand this hesitation, we must examine popular myths surrounding this campaign. The most common theory suggests that Hannibal's forces were simply too exhausted to march further. It is true that his men had fought a grueling battle and suffered thousands of painful casualties. Their heavy swords were dull, their armor cracked, and their muscles burned with severe physical fatigue. But these were battle-hardened veterans who had survived incredibly harsh conditions for many years. They were fueled by the intoxicating adrenaline of crushing the most feared army in the known world. Exhaustion alone could never stop a force that was currently smelling the ultimate bloody victory. Another accepted theory points to the formidable Servian walls protecting the great city. These massive stone fortifications were designed to repel the heaviest enemy assaults. Scholars often argue that Hannibal critically lacked the heavy equipment needed for a siege. His army had no massive battering rams, no towering siege engines, and no heavy catapults. Attacking fortified walls with only swords and spears is considered a truly fatal choice. But we must remember exactly who we are talking about in this crucial historical context. This is the visionary commander who dragged massive war elephants across the freezing Alps. He repeatedly achieved the impossible, by shattering conventional rules of ancient warfare. If anyone could improvise a method to breach a stone wall, it was certainly Hannibal Barca. The lack of siege equipment was merely an operational hurdle, not an absolute strategic barrier. Furthermore, a city overflowing with refugees could be easily starved into submission. He did not necessarily need to smash the gates if he could simply blockade their food supplies. So, if physical exhaustion and stone walls were not the primary deterrents, what exactly was? The truth requires us to step inside the calculating mind of the Carthaginian general. Within the dim light of his command tent, Hannibal stares intensely at a large parchment map. He is not just fighting a single geographic location, he is fighting a complex system. The Roman Republic derived its incredible resilience from a network of allied states. These loyal vassals provided an endless stream of manpower, money, and vital resources. Even if he burned the physical city of Rome to ashes, the surrounding republic would survive. If you were standing outside the gates of your ultimate enemy, would you walk away from victory? Think about the monumental pressure of that exact moment and the discipline to hold back. Hannibal understood a fundamental truth. You cannot simply stab an ideology with a sword. To permanently defeat the Romans, he had to systematically dismantle their network. His grand strategy was never about a direct, bloody assault on the fortified capital. It was a psychological masterclass designed to prove that Roman protection was an illusion. Obliterating their legions in the field, he shattered the myth of Roman invincibility. He wanted the Italian tribes to look at the carnage and voluntarily abandon their masters. Marching on Rome would have been a highly risky gamble that could unite his scattered enemies. If he attacked the city and failed, the aura of his untouchable genius would be broken. His deeply calculated restraint was an invitation for the vassals to defect peacefully. We must also consider the logistical nightmare that haunted the Carthaginian command. Hannibal was operating deep inside hostile territory, cut off from his homeland. The wealthy elites back in Carthage were hesitant to send him necessary reinforcements. His multi-ethnic mercenary army survived purely by foraging and raiding local farms. A prolonged static siege outside the walls of Rome would quickly consume all available food. While attempting to starve the Romans, his own troops would inevitably face total starvation. Disease, winter weather, and hunger were far deadlier enemies than any Roman soldier. Therefore, moving his forces south to secure wealthy, defecting cities was the logical move. Cities like Capua opened their gates, providing crucial supplies and validating his strategy. For a brief moment, it truly seemed like his brilliant diplomatic gamble was working perfectly. Several powerful tribes declared their allegiance to Carthage, betraying the Roman Senate. The Republic appeared to be fracturing from within, precisely as Hannibal had planned. He patiently waited in the shadows, letting internal rot do the heavy lifting for his army. However, this precise strategy contained one fatal flaw that would ultimately change world history. He profoundly underestimated the terrifying stubbornness of the Roman Republic. In the dark marble halls of the Senate, they completely outlawed the public display of mourning. They famously refused to negotiate a peaceful surrender, ignoring the rules of war. Instead of crumbling in despair, the disaster at Cannae forged their society into iron. They armed teenage recruits, freed loyal slaves, and relentlessly rebuilt their shattered military. Most importantly, the core structure of the Roman alliance remained incredibly loyal. The anticipated wave of tribal defections across Italy never materialized. Hannibal found himself trapped in a frustrating war of attrition that he could never possibly win. He could flawlessly win every tactical battle, but he was slowly losing the strategic war. As the years dragged on, his veteran forces dwindled, while the Roman war machine expanded. The brilliant tactical genius was outlasted by a society dedicated to total, absolute war. Looking back from the lonely darkness of his tent, the ghosts of his choices heavily surrounded him. The famous quote from Hannibal echoes tragically through the long corridors of history. You know how to win a victory, Hannibal.
How to win a victory.
But you do not know how to genuinely use it.
Do not know how to use one.
Was this a fair criticism from a frustrated subordinate, or the absolute truth of the campaign?
Will cost us everything.
Perhaps marching on Rome would have ended in a glorious, fiery death that history romanticized. Instead, he chose the cold logic of geopolitics, hoping to strangle the empire through diplomacy. But Rome was not just a collection of fragile treaties. It was an indomitable force of will. They were perfectly willing to bleed their population dry before accepting foreign subjugation. His ultimate failure was treating the Romans like any rational Mediterranean power. He played a perfect game of classical chess against an opponent willing to flip the entire board. The gates of Rome remained forever closed to him, locked by the unyielding spirit of its citizens. The blood spilled at Cannae became the horrifying foundation upon which a global empire was built. His hesitation, whether a brilliant strategy or fatal flaw, altered Western civilization. We are left to endlessly wonder what the world would look like if he had simply marched forward. The phantom of Hannibal Barca remains the ultimate symbol of a brilliant mind defeated. His brilliant military mind was defeated by an empire that simply refused to die. The legendary Carthaginian commander spent his final days living in painful exile. He was relentlessly hunted across the Mediterranean by paranoid Roman foes. He chose to embrace a quiet end, rather than face the ultimate humiliation of capture. His tragic death marked the absolute end of the once glorious and powerful city of Carthage. But the terrifying shadow of his legacy continued to haunt the Republic forever. Roman mothers would scare their crying children by whispering his terrifying name at night.
Us all.
Hannibal at the gates became the ultimate ancient symbol of overwhelming destruction. Military academies around the modern world still study his brilliant tactical moves. The devastating encirclement at Cannae remains a masterpiece of ancient warfare. Generals throughout history have desperately tried to replicate his legendary success. Yet very few possess the incredible audacity to execute such a bold plan. His incredible journey across the freezing Alps demonstrated unmatched human endurance. He inspired deep loyalty from a diverse mercenary army that never once mutinied. They willingly followed him into the darkest valleys of absolute certain destruction. This unyielding dedication proves his magnetic leadership and profound strategic vision. However, a tactician wins the bloody battles, but a logistician wins the entire war. Hannibal tragically lacked the continuous political support of his own government. The wealthy merchants of Carthage were incredibly blind to his ultimate and grand vision. They abandoned their greatest son when he desperately needed their financial assistance. Rome, on the other hand, sacrificed absolutely everything to ensure their own survival. They displayed an aggressive resilience that completely terrified the ancient world. The bloody fields of Cannae were eventually washed clean by the relentless rains of time. But the important lessons written in that muddy soil will resonate throughout eternity. The story of Hannibal teaches us about the absolute limits of individual genius. It proves how the collective willpower of a society can overcome total disaster. He remains a glorious failure, an immortal legend forever standing outside the gates. Did Hannibal make a fatal error, or was sparing the city a stroke of brilliant warfare? History judges the victors, but what is your final verdict on this ancient paradox? Share your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, please like and subscribe to our channel.